Autism and obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, have one major similarity, at least on the surface. Do you want to know how to tell the difference? Autism and OCD actually have a lot of major differences, but there is one diagnostic symptom that seems very similar when you first hear about it. And this similarity can lead to people getting confused and misjudging as to actually what is happening for them. In both autism and OCD, what you see a lot of and what is a diagnostic symptom is a thing called repetitive actions. Stereotypically, this can be things like lining up objects or counting out numbers out loud or in your head over and over again, or constantly rearranging things so that they're in very particular orders. When you look at the criteria for autism and you look at the criteria for OCD, both of them list a diagnostic symptom of repetitive actions and behaviors. That is to say, if I see a person engaging in repetitive behaviors with no clearly obvious functional purpose, this could be a really strong indicator of either autism or OCD. So that's what this video is about. How do you actually tell the difference between repetitive behaviors in autism versus repetitive behaviors in OCD? In previous videos, we've covered topics related to ADHD and anxiety. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to specifically differentiate repetitive actions in OCD with repetitive actions in autism. We'll start with a very brief overview of autism and OCD, then look at how repetitive actions in OCD and autism can be quite similar, and finally talk about how they can actually be very different. Finally, to close out, we'll talk about the major differences between autism and OCD so you can tell the two apart. My name is Dante, I'm a registered psychologist from Australia, and let's begin. If you want to be able to understand the difference between autism and OCD, what you need is a really good baseline understanding of both of these things. So this is the fastest rundown I can possibly give you. With our modern understanding of autism, we try to understand a person both through their strengths and their difficulties. However, classically speaking and in the diagnostic criteria, autism is identified by sets of challenges. And these include difficulties in the following areas: communication, social relationships, patterns of behavior and interest that are restrictive and repetitive in nature, and overarching sensory challenges. Autistic individuals often have difficulty picking up on social cues, understanding unwritten social rules, or engaging in typical back and forth conversation and communication. Alongside these social difficulties, there are often sensory sensitivities, intense focus on specific interests, and incredibly strong preference for routine and predictability, and behaviors that are very repetitive and ritualistic. For example, lining up objects in certain ways, rocking back and forth, engaging in vocal grunting behaviors, or things like turning light switches on and off. These are popularly known as stimming. OCD, on the other hand, is defined by intrusive thoughts and fears called obsessions. And these obsessions drive repetitive behaviors or rituals that we call compulsions. These compulsions are not done out of a sense of gaining enjoyment, but as a way to reduce the anxiety which is caused by the obsessions. For example, someone might obsessively worry about safety, and so then they compulsively engage in checking behaviors like checking the locks and checking the doors over and over and over again. Really, really importantly, OCD compulsive behaviors are often identified by the person who has them as unreasonable, but they feel unable to stop engaging in these behaviors because of the overwhelming anxiety and stress that comes out of the obsessions. Now that we have that quick overview, let's dig a little bit deeper into how repetitive actions show up in both OCD and autism. Repetitive behaviors are central to OCD and very, very common in autism, and at a glance, they might look identical. Let's explore why. In both situations, these behaviors are performed frequently, intensely, and in ways that might seem unusual to outside observers. For example, someone with autism might repeatedly arrange or stack objects based on their size or color or other categorization. Someone with OCD might repetitively count objects or arrange them in certain orders so that they feel just right. In both cases, the individual might become quite distressed if they become interrupted or are unable to complete this behavior. And the repetition can seem rigid and like there's a purpose driving it. It's not random. Because of these similarities, it's quite easy to understand why people would be able to mistake one for the other. But the way to differentiate them is to understand the key difference in why these behaviors are occurring. The key difference lies in motivation, the why behind the repetitive actions. In autism, repetitive actions often stem from a desire and need for sensory regulation, routine, and comfort. For example, a child with autism might line up cars in a certain order because it feels soothing, predictable, or visually satisfying. Or a person might flap their hands or repeat certain phrases to themselves because this is their way of self-regulating when they feel overwhelmed. These actions are often quite calming for the person, and they aren't necessarily tied to anxiety or fear. In OCD, however, repetitive actions are driven by an urgent need to neutralize an intrusive thought or to prevent something bad from happening. For example, a person might constantly reorganize their desk because they fear that disorganization will lead to some kind of catastrophe. Or they might wash their hands compulsively 30, 40, 50 times because they desperately are obsessed with and fear contamination and what's going to happen if they don't engage in this hand washing. The behaviors are absolutely not inherently enjoyable and at best serve to temporarily reduce the amount of distress that the person is feeling. And really importantly here, people with OCD often describe feeling trapped in a cycle. They know that their fears are irrational, but they feel powerless to stop the compulsions. So it's through an understanding of the motivation behind the repetitive actions that you can tell the difference and know if what you're seeing is repetitive actions from autism or OCD. Beyond repetitive actions, there are other key differences that can help you distinguish between OCD and autism. Autistic individuals will often struggle with social situations and forming new friendships. They will often find social situations to be overwhelming or confusing and might prefer solitary activities. People with OCD don't inherently have this same social difficulty. Their social challenges, if they are present, are more likely to stem from the time-consuming nature of their compulsive engagements, or a sense of embarrassment around their symptoms. Individuals with OCD also tend to be very aware that their behaviors are very excessive and unreasonable. And this awareness of this excess is often another contributor to their level of distress. Autistic individuals are much less likely to view their behaviors as problematic in any way. They may just simply see them as a part of who they are, or simply a preferred way of interacting with the world or self-soothing. When it comes to treatment, OCD behaviors respond really well to things like cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and response prevention therapy, which is a type of CBT. For autism, however, treatment doesn't really involve trying to cease these repetitive behaviors at all. Interventions are more so around building skills, supporting a person's sensory needs, and creating a predictable environment rather than trying to eliminate behaviors. So while OCD and autism can both have repetitive actions as part of their diagnostic criteria, the motivation, awareness, and broader context of these actions differ significantly. Understanding these differences not only helps with an accurate diagnosis, but also ensures that a person receives the right intervention and supports for their specific and unique needs. What's also really interesting is the connection between autism and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. That video is going to come out soon. Any other questions, leave them in the comments and I'll answer them in my next Q&A. Bye. No, hey, no, Guzzy, no. Calm. Want to be in the video, mate? You want to be in the video? Yeah, you can be in the video.